For people listening who may not fully understand the importance of why they would choose children for this, what are your insights on that? Why wouldn't they just use, say, the military that we already have, or people that are, a little bit older? Like, what's the significance of choosing this so young and then getting these programs, doing military programming as a child and just instilling that grooming in somebody so young? How would you explain that to people?
uh, Children have been used as soldiers from the antiquity of time, and it's only in modernity that we have had an artificial extension of adolescence, and that came by design through the systemic dumbing down of our society through the education system. Children have not been children like we think of as today, except in modernity in our culture. You go all over the world. I went to Afghanistan just before my wife and I began to date, and I got to see what people call children working, laboring, serving their families, diligently providing what they need. I saw shepherd boys. Okay, let me just say that. That was the thing that just like blew my mind and changed me forever to understand how the rest of the world views children. And they have the right attitude and perspective of them. They train them up as if they're humans and adults, not just some kind of infantile thing that needs to be shoved in a junk drawer called a classroom for the rest of their life. And they did not raised their children to be stupid. They raised them to be competent and capable. And it enabled them to be participants in the society just as much as an adult. Because a 12-year-old boy is exceedingly capable of doing incredible acts of heroics and physical merit and strength, way more than a guy who's 45 in a lot of ways. And so they don't waste that. Like, part of the understanding that our society, the mass society, does not get raised up with, they don't get access to maybe the knowledge base, is to look at their children as intentionally hardwired built to learn immediately. They are able to do and grow and understand instantly from when they're born in the womb, right? They understand life begins at conception. Like, they actually believe that. Now, they might have agendas that try to dissuade people and convince them to chemically castrate and kill their babies immediately for the idols of or for the fear of men or the fear of lack or their careers or whatever else they sacrifice their children to. They have an understanding that you should train your children up immediately. As soon as they express talents, you provide for them the ability to express those talents in a way that fulfills the family's needs. And so when I was 27, what began to really unravel with so much of this was those missing pieces began to really come into grips. I began to hear people like Russ Dizdar, like I shared earlier, who was speaking all these secrets about mind control. He wrote a book called The Black Awakening, which is now $2,000 on Amazon because they're trying to price restrict it so that people don't have access to this information. But it was the rise of the satanic super soldier. And he, in that, was dismantling these assassins. He was dismantling these child assassins and how these mind control operations were profiteering off of child exploitation. And as my wife and I, we ended up going to a conference in, I think, 2014 down. It was called Prophecy in the News Conference in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I wanted to hear Russ Dizdar speak. I had seen him on YouTube and online for so long, and I wanted to see him in person, like see he's a real living human being, and he's not dead. That was just like this. He was just his living witness, man. He's a living stone. You're like, you can't kill a stone. They're really hard to kill. And he was like that. He was this guy who's just like, he was ferocious. And he was standing on the stage and he was talking about all these witches that were in the room right now. And they're going to be doing curses and all this stuff. And he was like, I'm not afraid. Like, because like he just had this boldness to just call everybody out in the room and all their agendas that were taking place. And that these people are here to curse me. They're here to curse you. They're here to add confusion. And my wife at the time was sitting there like, oh my gosh, because for her, she did not come from this world. She didn't come from this background at all. She also had not watched a lot of Russ Dizdar. I was like all into this stuff for years, and I was like closet style. It's like when some of you guys wake up to these conspiracies and you never tell a soul. You're like, I'm not telling anybody. I don't want them to know I know. You're like scared. You're like, I don't want them to know my search history. I don't know. You're trying to go through all these links, and you're like, I don't want anybody to know it. I was like that then. I was like, I never had a YouTube that I logged into. I was like using Tor and I was like going all through the dark web to try to look at this. Oh, it's just so ridiculous. But it's just fear, it's just fear. We got a culture of fear in our society, and fear is a sin. And we got it. Literally, you have to murder it out of your life. You have to strangle it and hold it under the water until it dies. And then when it comes back from the dead, you just got to crucify it again. And when it comes back, you got to beat it to death. That's fear in our society. And instead, they've engineered a society that just fuels fear. They play on our irrationality instead of raising a society of rational humans. They've trained us to be irrational, and then they profit off of that. But she was in this room, and it was called, I think the title of his talk was called the satanic infiltration of the church. And Chelsea saw the title and was like, I do not want to go to that. And I was like, that's why we should go. That's why we should go. And in that conference talk, he was talking about these witches that were active in the room. And he talked about the assassins that are in the room. And he's like, they'll have blades strapped to their chest. And Chelsea like looked over at me and she reached over and touched my chest. And I was like, had knives strapped to my body. And she was like, what? And it was like, for her, there was like the realization began to happen to her so fast right there in that room. And for me, I was just like this, just overwhelming. Like I could have cried with relief because somebody had seen my identity. Somebody had witnessed me and not been afraid and not run away and not shamed me. Somebody had identified me in a crowd, had spotted me. And I was happy about it. All the rest of my life, it was like, be background noise. Don't let anybody see you. Like just pop in and pop out. Just like I'd been so trained in these grade protocols for so long that like suddenly it was like there was a spotlight on me and it was like peace. And I was like, this is the greatest thing I've ever known. My wife has connected with a part of my identity and she's not left the room yet. Now, she did leave the room soon after, but she went to the bathroom. And in the bathroom, she goes to the bathroom and these ladies in there, so ridiculous. She goes to the bathroom, she goes to the sink, and there's this woman who's standing at the sink. She's got it like full of like clogged it and full of water. And she's doing like these sigils and curses in like the soap and the smoke and the fog. She's watching this lady and she's like, oh my gosh. She's like, it's totally real. And she like goes over to the sink and the woman looks over at her and she goes, this is, and she's like, oh my, she's like rebuking the lady in her brain. She's all like rebuking her. She's like, it's going down, man. She came back and it was like, oh my gosh. So for her, it was like the paradigm was erupted out of her. Like she realized that this stuff is active, it's taking place, and I'm pretty sure my husband is this. And now what? Like now what? He was describing runners and all the rest of us. And I had a job at that time. I went into mental health because obviously I wanted to understand what was wrong. I went into philosophy and mental health because I wanted to be able to clearly communicate and I wanted to be able to comprehend how to fix the soul because I recognized my soul was damaged. And that's what psychologists are. They're soul workers. And at the same time, they deny soul exists. It's a really complex world full of all kinds of contradictions, but we got to find the truth. And so at that same exact window of time, she started having this understanding that there was something about her husband that she needed to understand. And I started recognizing that she didn't run away when she saw me. Like all my life, I'd been trained basically when you're identified, it will lead to, well, not my death, because I couldn't die. Like I didn't have any fear of death because every time I'd faced death, I'd lived. Every time I'd faced death, I'd conquered it. And so I didn't have any fear of death, but I had a fear of people rejecting me. I had a fear of men and a fear of women. And there was only one person in the entire world at that point that I actually cared would leave me. And that was her. And I had so many lies spoken over me throughout my life that, like, if you tell anybody, they're going to leave you. If you tell anybody, and so many of you don't understand this, if you talk about this stuff, we're going to come out in all this other lies. Satan is a liar. He's the father of lies, y'all. And all these people can do is stand on their lies. And when they're confronted, they just lie more. Like the only way they can build up their kingdom is with more lies, more deceit. Like just double down. Like, and if you tell a lie, like they believe, like Goebbels and these people that were the propagandists for the Nazis in the early 1930s, 1940s, like the people that engineered a society that was willing to shoot babies in the head and slaughter millions of people. Like they engineered that society generations beforehand. And they did that through eugenics programs and through people's a religious ideology that infected the nation of basically Darwinian evolution, but a scientific dogma of the favored races. Like don't ever forget, Darwin's book was all about race warfare. And people like to hold fast to Darwinian evolution. At the same time, they've neutered his book's title because he was all about the favored races, the evolution of the favored races. But that ideology gave them a scientific validation for what people used to call the divine right of kings to rule. And that gave them the power to just slaughter masses or rule over them, do anything they wanted to them. Now they had a scientific reason to say, yeah, we're literally the strongest are going to survive. And because you're so stupid, you don't read our books, our writings, and apply them, we have the right to overpower you and kill you. That same very man, basically, they purported that if you tell a lie long enough and over enough, people will begin to believe it. Just keep saying the lie, keep saying the lie. And they would do it. This is the doctrines of Balaam, like you read about in the scriptures. Read the book of Numbers, chapters 22 through 25. Read the book of Revelation. You'll see these doctrines of Balaam, people that want the wages of unrighteousness that come along as the counselors of kings. To help the kings shore up their power, they show them how to do this old religion, to do this great magical working against people, to use sorcery, divination, passing their children through the fires of Moloch. this all began to kind of just blow itself apart when I realized that there was a lie, and love was far more powerful than fear. And I was like, oh man, maybe I could know love. Maybe I could experience love. Maybe my wife and I could love each other again. Because up until that point, there was basically mutual animosity. I basically resented her because I was not able to be a lone wolf and go out and hunt and slaughter all these bad guys I was identifying. And because I had a name, I had a physical address, I had all this other stuff, a job. I wanted to disappear back into the ether like I came from, and be able to come out and hunt these people. And I had this resentment towards her, and I wanted to be free of that, but I didn't know how to get free of it. And love was truly the catalyst that launched that. And so she began to see and identify me as something other than just this Christian guy I married who, went to psychology. And I started working with adjudicated youth and people that had severe sexual traumas throughout their life. I became an assistant supervisor of a semi-locked residential facility for 6-year-olds to 18-year-olds that had been either victims of trauma and sexual abuse or perpetrators themselves. And oftentimes there was both in there, highly sexualized children who were trying to get healing. And it was in that very same facility, they had all these runners. They would call them runners when children would just get into this panic, this fear mode, and they would just run as fast as they could. And at that time, when I was working there, I could catch every child or every adult that ran. I could catch them all. It was like I had the runner and I would go after him, and everyone called me the runner. And she was looking over at me as Russ Dizdar was in there, and he's describing runners. He's describing these assassins, and he's describing all this stuff. And she's like, this guy is reading my husband's resume. And it was disturbing to her. But at the same time, she lacked a category for understanding. And this is where I think a lot of spouses or a lot of singletons, people that are of a single mind, people that have been raised outside of the society, this is where the bridge has been exploded. This is where there has been a designed deceit to keep people from understanding and crossing over that threshold to understand that, yes, this is a systemic, scientific methodology that's been taking place for generations to destroy the human soul, to radically pervert and corrupt a child. And so that their identity is so destroyed, they can never do anything other than what the guiding puppeteering hands say. And she didn't still have that full comprehension and understanding, but she was willing to stay. She was willing to persevere. She was willing to abide. And so when she conceived Naomi and I began to come unglued. I'll just put it super transparently. I knew that if I did not do everything I could to get healing as fast as humanly possible before that child was born, my daughter was going to go, or my child was going to go straight through it. We knew we were going to have a girl. Her and I had dreams our whole life that we were going to have a little girl. And we knew that her name was going to be Naomi. We were like, that's our daughter, Naomi. But for me, I was like, if I don't do everything I can to utterly destroy this, it is going to capture and consume another generation. And we ended up going to a conference down in Dallas called Hear the Watchman, and Russ Dizdar was speaking again. And he called people up for prayer, and a man named Tom Dunn came and he prayed for me when I was just lying on my face. And during that prayer, the Father used him to help root this amnesic tree out of me. And it was like the floodgates of understanding came pouring in, and I became undone. Everything that had been placed there demonically and spiritually and physically and technologically just began to come out of me. I began to ooze black goo out of my feet. I began to have all these bodily injuries that I'd had throughout my life begin to express themselves again, bruises showing up, like all these ab reactions began to happen physically on my body as I was remembering all these things. It was just like I was thrown into the blender that any of you who survivors understand, or families of survivors have seen, where they fall apart, and that's super awkward when you're still an adult and you're still just trying to live a life and you're still trying to work a job. And I, at the same time, had that fire in me to persevere. I had a desire in me for my daughter to have freedom that just kept me going, that I had to get healed. And so I started looking into every version of counseling and healing I could get my hands on, but all secretly because I hadn't told Chelsea. And so it really wasn't until the moment came where I finally told her that I got to experience what true love can be. When I told her who I was, when I told her what my family was a part of, when I told her all of these things that I had done, and I became vulnerable at a level that I never had with any other person in the history of my life. And she stayed with me. We sat on our front porch, and I turned into a 5-year-old, screaming, crying, blubbering, mess. And at the same time, for her, it was the biggest wave of relief, because she understood. She finally had that bridge of her confusion that had been so impossible for her to walk over was finally rebuilt. And it was built through vulnerability. It was built through me being willing to lose everything. And she continued to persistently love me amidst those circumstances. But for her, it also finally helped her understand what the heck was going on, because she was a discerner of people, and she always had these horrifically creeped out vibes with my grandfather. And there's some seriously disturbing things that were happening around me, like that my family would make everybody do these little child plays and stuff. And she was like, there's some perverse, weird things that are going on here, but I don't know what's going on. So for her, she was greatly relieved, but at this, and then angry. She was so mad. She was so mad. And my wife is like, if you guys watch our channel and our video for years, like, people don't see Chelsea as angry like ever. They're like, she's just this like, oh, she's so loving and sweet and all the
Yeah,
rest.
she's a
Yeah,
bright light.
but she is like got this like, y'all, my wife can burn the earth down with her mouth. I'll tell you what, man, there ain't nothing like a woman's love and her tender loving care towards her children. And it's a real stinking thing, man. When you cross that, man, you're going to get your head ripped to pieces. She's going to peel your skin off your flesh with the words of her mouth. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's defending me. Like, she's defending me. She became an advocate as opposed to an adversary. And so at the same process of my healing, she was willing to abide with me and stick with me. Like, she like literally was like, I still meant the words of my vow when I spoke them to you when we got married. Even though that wasn't you, it's still you. Like, I still love you. I still care for you, and we are still in this together. And she was, I think, right around maybe 7 months pregnant. It was almost exactly 7 years ago at this point. And so I went back to my family, which is crazy. I don't necessarily recommend this, y'all. I'll just say this real clear. On the other side, looking past on all this stuff, I don't know. This is one of those decisions that you wrestle with when you're not in that like total kind of panicky, fearful state. But I had this passionate love for them. I began to like get healing for these areas of my life. I began to kind of deal with the dissociation and deal with the trauma pockets and start getting healing into these different physical areas of my brain. And I started having like relief. And then I started having this like innate desire to see them set free. Like I have a hunger for people to be set free. I literally believe the words that are in the scriptures that said like Yeshua came to set the captives free. I have never left that my entire life. He came to heal the broken heart, to bind up the brokenhearted, to set captives free, like to proclaim liberty, like freedom to the slaves. Like, this is like, that has never left me my entire life. And that means that's my job. That is my job for the rest of my life, is to preach that to everybody. Everywhere I go, I'm supposed to say that to every creature. Like, you can know healing and peace. And I believed it, and I stuck with it. And I was like, I know the cure for bitterness, wrath, hatred, like anger and murder was forgiveness. I knew it was forgiveness and ultimately love for my enemies. And so in order to go from, hey, how about I just go and kill all of these people, to, hey, how about I go and forgive all of these people? It took a good long time, but I got to a place where I wanted to go back to them and tell them I forgive them, tell them like, I remember all these things. And yet amidst them, I want you to know I forgive you and I love you, and you can have healing and restoration. And this is how I have found healing and restoration. And that was when I realized that my family was still totally caught up in it, that my family was still active players in the game, that I had been out of it for a few years, but they were still heavily seated in. They doubled down. They doubled down and they tried to eviscerate me. They went to every friend group that I had, all of my jobs. Like, my dad literally went down when I first started speaking out publicly on this. He used to comment hundreds of times on my videos, and he had the other handler, the military guy, Richard, which is all over all of my videos. It was insane. I started trying to talk to these people about it, but they tried to bury the secrets even more, which just kind of fueled me, honestly, in my pursuit. When I find corruption and or anything else, and somebody tries to stifle it, man, it's just like fuel in the fire. Like, let's just keep going. Like, you guys who want to keep these things secret are going to lose. I've read it. He says everything they've done in secret is going to be shouted. Everything they've done in secret is going to be proclaimed on the rooftops. Like, there ain't no hiding from his eyes. He sees all their deeds. His eyes are in all the earth, and they say these things in secret. Like, who sees it? They just because you go underground in a tunnel, you think he can't see you. Just because you go down in your bunker, in your bridge, you think he can't see you. Like, it's just such naivety. It's such blindness. That's this searing of the mind that's taking place in them. But it fueled me. It was just this insatiable fuel for me to keep going. And so I started sharing it with everyone. It was like, some of you all survivors, you get set free and you're like, I'm telling the world. Now, I didn't have a YouTube platform or any of that stuff. I wasn't going to tell the world, but I told everybody I could get my hands on. But to most other people, then I was just insane, right? And it's true. You're pretty crazy. Still pretty crazy. It's fantastic. It's fun. Be crazy. It's good for you. And it was in that time where I realized, hey, like they really can make you lose your job. They really can make you lose all your finances. They really can do a lot of these things. But you know what? Praise yeah. It was the best thing that could have happened to my wife and I, because you know what I got? I got purchased my time back. I got time. So like my wife, she had a successful nursing career that she hated just perpetually because of the systems of care and the systems of slavery that she was in bondage to, like systems of destruction of the human body. And she's like, I want to heal people and I don't want to keep poisoning them and killing them. This is so broken. And so when she gave birth to Naomi, she stopped working, and then we're both working. We're around each other all the time, and I'm just like coming unglued because now I'm hearing crying babies, and I was like, it's just crazy. It was nuts. We started having people still kept trying to kill us, and it wasn't working, and we were just like in this bizarre little world in a neighborhood where people were leaving chunks of human flesh in our yard. People were coming and cursing us, and it went so crazy so fast. And we were just kind of stuck in the midst of this whirlwind happening all around us. And we knew we wanted out, we wanted freedom, we wanted healing, we wanted restoration, but we had no idea how to do that. And we were firmly planted in the heart of darkness in a neighborhood called Countryside, Westminster. And they were actively slaughtering a girl named Jessica Ridgway. There was active coven members who were butchering babies and children in that neighborhood. Public news. And we were like trapped right in the middle of it. And we were like going out and prayer walking. We're taking Russ Dizdar. He had this like spiritual intercession prayer manual, and where you go out and prayer map where all the territory, where all this stuff is going on. And we were just, we were at it, man. We were on to these people. We were hunting them down, and we were just interceding for them. We were just asking the Father to forgive the sins that were empowering this veil of secrecy everywhere. And we just wanted to see the captives set free everywhere we went. And so it was really in the course of that time that I decided it was like the Father was calling me to share my testimony, to reach out to Tom Dunnigan and let him know that what happened after that prayer, and let him know that there was a family that was alive because that man was willing to weigh down into this filthy mire and pray with brothers and sisters who were so broken. It was because people were willing to lay down their lives that there was sons and daughters who were raised up without it. Like my grandfather never touched Naomi. Praise yeah. They flew up to Arizona, from Arizona to Colorado to try to get to the birth. And man, there was a guy who is worth 30 men, armed cadre, guarding her at the birth center when she was born. Like nobody got to touch her. Praise be to the Father for that. And like it was like everything was finally set up for us to go on a journey of understanding.
What a story. I love your love story, and it's so inspiring. There's a couple other married couples that I know where the memories surface during marriage. I don't hear of it often, but you really do see how powerful it is to have that validation from another person that you love, and to hear those words like, I love all of you, like I love every part of you, and like I accept you. And I just love that, she wasn't intimidated by it. It shows the strength of her spirit too, that she, despite her past and not having come in contact with this, that she was so open-minded, and that her heart was, thrown into the abyss of love per se, to, accept you for who you were and not run away from it. Cause that's what people do. Unfortunately, we see it everywhere in society. I even get, and I understand this stuff's hard to listen to, but it's discouraging even as a content creator when I see a comment on my YouTube of, oh, I had to turn it off, it was too much for me. And it's like, I get it. Some of these details are hard. And I try not to go into too much detail all the time. Not everybody needs to understand all the details to understand, the big picture. That's more important. But, it's like, gosh, we didn't have to live it, and how powerful it is, in our worst moments. If we think about, if we have somebody pass away in our lives, or if we have a bad breakup, like all that stuff's very traumatic, and I ask people to think about, what if everybody in your life just abandoned you and was like, oh, you had a bad breakup and your heart's broken? Well, good for you. Go figure it out. You're crazy. You're acting crazy. It's like, gosh, how lonely and isolating that space is, when all we want to do is be heard, and all we want to do is feel that compassion of somebody loving that is willing to look into that darkness with us.